The shattering of a wine glass was not the only sound tearing through the air at the Victory Gala. It was the scornful laughter of the man I had called husband for 7 years as he labeled me a useless burden before 500 employees. I stood paralyzed until a stranger leaned in, his voice deep and commanding. "Come with me." That was the moment I decided to burn his empire to the ground. My name is Elena, and I was standing in the center of a beautiful, glittering lie. The grand ballroom of Vertex Holdings was a temple to excess, situated on the 65th floor where the air was thin and the people were fake. Everything smelled of cold money and imported orchids. Waiters in white gloves moved like ghosts through the crowd, offering flutes of champagne that cost more than most people earned in a month, while the city of New York sprawled out beneath us, a grid of golden lights indifferent to my misery. I pressed myself into the shadow of a massive marble pillar, trying to make myself invisible. It was a habit I had perfected over the last 7 years. From my vantage point, I watched him, Richard, my husband. He stood in the center of the room, bathing in the adoration of 500 employees and investors. He looked immaculate in his bespoke tuxedo, throwing his head back to laugh at a joke that I knew was not funny. He was the sun, and everyone else was just a planet desperate for his warmth. Then the crowd parted, and my breath caught in my throat like a shard of glass. Serafina approached him. She was the new creative director, a woman 10 years my junior with a smile that could cut steel. But it was not her smile that stopped my heart. It was her dress. It was an emerald silk gown with a complicated architectural drape across the bodice. I knew every stitch of that dress. I knew the tension of the fabric because I had sketched it at 3 a.m. 2 months ago, sitting at our kitchen island while Richard slept. When I had shown it to him, he had sneered and tossed the sketchbook into the trash. "It looks cheap. Elena," he had said, "stick to managing the house staff." Now, watching his hand linger on Serafina's waist as he complimented the very design he had called cheap, I felt a nausea so violent I thought I might faint. The lights dimmed. Richard stepped up to the podium, the microphone whining slightly before his smooth baritone voice took command of the room. "Thank you all for coming," Richard said, his smile blinding. "Tonight, we celebrate the Skyline Project, a vision that will redefine the Manhattan horizon, a testament to pure, unadulterated genius." I gripped my clutch until my knuckles turned white. The Skyline Project was mine. Every angle, every load-bearing wall, every calculation of wind resistance was mine. I was a licensed architect with a master's degree, yet here I stood, watching him sell my soul as his own. But no man succeeds alone, Richard continued, scanning the crowd. The spotlight swung around, hunting through the darkness until it hit me with the force of a physical blow. "I want to invite my lovely wife, Elena, up here." I froze. The applause pushed me forward. I walked up the stairs, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. Richard pulled me close, his grip on my shoulder tight and possessive, a warning disguised as affection. "Elena is the true back end of my life," Richard announced, chuckling into the microphone. "While I am out here building empires, she makes sure the credit cards are working and the house looks pretty. Honestly, I do not know how she finds the time between the spa and the shopping mall. I suppose spending my money is a full-time job." The room erupted in laughter. It was a cruel, sophisticated sound. I stood there, humiliated, stripped of my intellect and reduced to a caricature of a parasitic wife. I opened my mouth to speak, to scream, but no sound came out. But the real creative force. Richard turned away from me, dismissing me like a piece of used furniture. He gestured to the side. The true intellect behind Skyline. My muse. "Serafina." Serafina stepped up, beaming. Richard looked at her with a hunger he had not shown me in 5 years. Out with the old, in with the new. He joked, winking at the audience, but his eyes were dead serious as he glanced back at me. Right, darling, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The laughter roared in my ears, deafening and mocking. I felt the tears pricking my eyes, hot and shameful. I could not stay here. I could not be the punchline to his joke for 1 second longer. I turned and stumbled toward the stairs, nearly tripping on my gown. I reached the floor, head down, desperate to reach the exit doors. I just wanted to vanish, but a wall of a man blocked my path. I stopped, looking up through my blurred vision. He was tall, radiating a dark, terrifying power that made the air around him feel heavier. He did not move to let me pass. This was Julian. I did not know his name then, but I saw the fire in his eyes. He did not look at me with the pity the others had shown. He looked at me with recognition. He leaned down, invading my personal space, smelling of sandalwood and rain. Do not cry for him. He is not worth the salt in your tears, he whispered, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in my chest. I stared at him, my breath coming in short, painful gasps. I have to go. No, he said firmly. He extended a hand, his palm rough and warm. Come with me. We will take back everything that belongs to you, even the soul of this company. I placed my hand in his. It was an impulsive decision, a leap of faith taken by a woman plummeting into the abyss. Julian did not hesitate. He guided me through the crowd with the precision of a predator moving through tall grass. We did not exit through the grand double doors where the photographers were waiting. Instead, he led me through the kitchen service entrance, past startled waiters and stacks of dirty dishes. Just before the heavy steel door swung shut behind us, I glanced back one last time. Richard had stopped laughing. He was staring at the empty space where I had stood, a look of genuine confusion cracking his perfect mask. A sleek, black phantom limousine waited in the alleyway, its engine purring like a restrained beast. Julian opened the door for me, and the silence inside the cabin was immediate and absolute. As the car pulled away, merging into the chaotic traffic of Manhattan, I finally looked at the stranger who had kidnapped me from my own humiliation. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "And why did you help me?" He poured a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter and offered it to me. "My name is Julian Blackwood. I am the CEO of Ironwood." I froze, the glass halfway to my lips. Ironwood was the only company Vertex Holdings feared. Richard had spent years cursing Julian's name, calling him a ruthless savage who would eat his own young for a profit margin. "You are the enemy," I whispered. "I am his enemy," Julian corrected, his eyes locking onto mine. "Which makes me your only ally. Open the folder. Elena." He pointed to a thick leather portfolio resting on the seat between us. My hands shook as I undid the clasp. Inside was a chaotic spread of bank statements, emails, and photographs. I pulled out the first document. It was a transfer authorization for $2 million to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. The signature at the bottom was mine. I never signed this," I stammered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What is this? That is how Richard pays for his lifestyle," Julian said, his voice devoid of pity but heavy with facts. "He has been siphoning funds from Vertex for 3 years. He set up dummy corporations in your name. When the IRS comes looking, and they will come looking soon, Richard will claim he knew nothing. You are his scapegoat. Elena." I flipped through the pages, nausea rising in my throat. There were my blueprints for the Skyline project sold to a construction firm in Dubai 6 months ago. He had been stripping the company for parts, selling my intellectual property out the back door while mocking me publicly at the front door. Then I saw the photograph at the bottom of the stack. It was a grainy image of Serafina and Richard leaving a fertility clinic. Attached was a copy of an ultrasound. "She is 4 months pregnant," Julian said softly. "Richard plans to file for divorce on Friday. He will claim you embezzled the company funds to support a secret gambling addiction. He will take the house, your reputation, and your freedom. He wants you in prison so he can play the grieving victim while he raises a new family with her." The air left my lungs. He told me he was infertile. He told me it was my fault we could not have children. The betrayal was not a sharp knife. It was a bludgeon. It crushed the last remnants of the woman I had been. I looked down at the forged signatures and the stolen designs. For 7 years, I had believed I was the less talented one, the lucky one to be married to a genius. But I was the genius. I was the architect. He was just a thief in a tuxedo. The tears that had threatened to fall in the ballroom evaporated. In their place, a cold, hard resolve began to crystallize in my chest. I closed the folder. The leather felt cool under my fingertips. "Why show me this?" I asked. My voice sounded different to my own ears. It was steadier, lower. "Because I want Vertex Holdings," Julian admitted, leaning forward. "I have the capital and the lawyers to destroy him, but I do not know the soul of the company. You do. You built it. I will give you the best legal team in New York. I will clear your name. I will help you take back every cent he stole. And in return, you give me the company, and you help me watch him bleed." I looked out the window. We were passing the Vertex Tower now. It loomed over the city, a monument to my stolen labor. "No," I said. Julian raised an eyebrow. Surprised? "I will not just help you watch him bleed." I turned to him, my eyes dry and burning with a new, terrifying purpose. "I want to hold the knife. I want to be the one who twists it." Julian smiled, and for the first time, it reached his eyes. "Deal." As the limousine glided through the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan, the silence inside the cabin acted as a mirror, forcing me to look backward into the past 7 years. The luxury of the leather seats faded away, replaced by the memory of a cramped, windowless basement in Queens where Richard and I had started. The air there had always smelled of stale coffee and damp drywall. I remembered sitting at a rickety drafting table, my back screaming in protest, sketching for 18 hours a day until my vision blurred. Richard would come in, smelling of cheap cologne and ambition, and he would massage my tense shoulders. "Elena, baby, look at you," he would coo, his voice dripping with a sweetness that I now recognized as venom. "You are the genius, my love. But the world is cruel to female architects. They will not respect you. Let me be the face. I will handle the sharks, and you just build the aquarium. Let me shine for us." It had sounded so logical then. I was shy, focused on the art. He was charismatic, focused on the deal. I handed him my light, and he cast a shadow over me that grew longer with every passing year. The control was subtle at first, like a vine slowly strangling a tree. First, it was the finances. He insisted on managing the accounts because I was too artistic to understand numbers. Then, my allowance began. A grown woman, a partner in a multi-million-dollar firm, asking for $50 to buy lunch. Then came the erosion of my confidence. "You are wearing that," Richard would ask, grimacing as we prepared for a gala. "It makes you look washed out. Maybe stay home tonight." You look tired, and I do not want you to embarrass yourself. You know how judgmental these investors are." So I stayed home. I faded. I stopped seeing my friends because Richard convinced me they were jealous of our success. I stopped calling my mother because he said she was too controlling. I became an island, and he was the only boat that ever docked. When I found receipts for suites at the Plaza or the Ritz, he always had the perfect, indignant excuse. "Those are for the VIP clients." "Elena, do you think deals close themselves? Stop being so suffocating. It is pathetic." I looked down at the dossier Julian had given me, specifically at a birth certificate clipped to a photograph of Serafina. "She is not new," Julian said, his voice cutting through my reverie. "Serafina is the daughter of Marcus Vane. Does the name ring a bell?" I shook my head slowly. "He was Richard's first silent partner," Julian explained. "A known money launderer. Serafina has been in Richard's life since she was 19. This was not an affair, Elena. This was a long-term investment. They have been planning to push you out since the day the company went public. The revelation hit me with physical force. My marriage had not been a relationship, it had been a heist. They had stolen my youth, my talent, and my trust. "We are here," Julian said. The car idled down the street from the mansion Richard and I shared. It was a cold, imposing structure of glass and steel, my design, corrupted by his taste for ostentation. "He is still at the after-party." Julian checked his watch. "You have 40 minutes. I do not want the clothes," I said, my voice steady. "I do not want the jewelry." I slipped out of the car and entered the house through the side gate, punching in the code with trembling fingers. The house was silent. I walked past the living room where I had spent countless nights waiting for him and went straight to the master bedroom. I did not pack a suitcase. I knelt before the antique cedar chest at the foot of the bed. I pulled out the bottom drawer and pried up the false bottom I had installed 5 years ago, a small act of rebellion I had never understood until now. Lying there, wrapped in protective oilskin, were the original hand-drawn schematics for every major project Vertex had built, including the unreleased Phoenix project. These were the originals, the proofs of authorship, the soul he thought he owned. I placed the rolls into a waterproof tube and slung it over my shoulder. As I walked out of that house, I left my wedding ring on the marble console table. I did not look back. When I climbed back into Julian's car, I felt a strange lightness in my chest. "Did you get what you needed?" Julian asked. "I got everything," I replied, clutching the tube. "Let's go to work." The Monday morning sun did not feel like a new beginning. It felt like a spotlight on a crime scene. Following Julian's advice, I walked back into the glass doors of Vertex Holdings not as the avenging angel I felt like inside, but as the beaten, repentant wife. I wore a dress in a soft, submissive shade of beige, my hair pulled back in a modest bun. I needed Richard to believe he had won. I needed him to believe he had broken me. When I entered his office, Richard was leaning back in his chair, feet up on the mahogany desk, spinning a fountain pen between his fingers. He looked at me and let out a short, barking laugh. "I knew you would come back," he said, shaking his head with mock pity. "You have nowhere else to go, do you?" "Elena, the world out there is too cold for a delicate flower like you." I lowered my eyes, clenching my hands together to hide the tremor of rage coursing through my veins. I just want to make things right. Richard, I don't want to lose us." "Good girl," he smirked, pointing to the coffee machine. "Make me an espresso, and try not to mess it up this time." As I turned my back to him to brew the coffee, I slipped the tiny black device Julian had given me out of my sleeve. It was a high-grade listening bug, smaller than a dime. With a sleight of hand I had practiced 100 times in my hotel room the night before, I stuck it to the underside of the shelving unit behind his desk. For the next 3 days, I played the part of the invisible wife. I brought coffee, I organized files, and I endured the whispers of the staff. But at night, in the safe house Julian had provided, we listened. Through the static, the truth of Richard's next move became terrifyingly clear. The Phoenix launch must be flawless. Richard's voice crackled over the speaker. "Investors are putting in over $1 billion. Once the funds clear, we move the assets to the offshore accounts and file for bankruptcy." I stared at the audio equipment, my blood running cold. The Phoenix Project. It was my magnum opus, a sustainable eco-city design I had spent 2 years perfecting before Richard told me it was unrealistic and shelved it. Now, he was using it as the bait for the biggest con in the history of the company. I needed an army. I reached out to Sarah, my former assistant who Richard had fired for being too loyal to me. We met in a crowded diner far from the financial district. When I told her the plan, her eyes lit up with a fierce determination. She immediately began contacting the other ousted employees, the engineers and accountants Richard had bullied out of the firm. We were building a resistance right under his nose. Meanwhile, Julian was fighting the war on the financial front. He set up a dozen shell companies, untraceable entities that began aggressively buying up small shares from disgruntled investors. We were slowly, silently acquiring a foothold in the company Richard thought he owned completely. The hardest part was the daily humiliation. Serafina made sure of that. On Thursday afternoon, she cornered me in the break room. She was wearing a diamond ring that caught the light aggressively, and she rested her hand conspicuously on her slight baby bump. "It is tragic, really," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Richard told me he is going to let you keep the old Volvo after the divorce. He is so generous, considering you brought nothing to the table." She stepped closer, invading my personal space. "This baby is going to have everything you couldn't give him, a legacy, a real mother." I wanted to slap the smile off her face. I wanted to scream that the baby she was carrying was likely not even Richard's, based on the timeline Julian had uncovered. But I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. I hope you are happy," I managed to stammer, forcing a tear to escape my eye. Serafina laughed, satisfied with her victory, and strutted away. She did not know that while she was gloating, I had swiped the key card to Richard's private apartment from her open purse. That evening, while Richard and Serafina were at a gala, I entered the penthouse apartment he used for his affairs. It smelled of her perfume. I went straight to the closet in the master bedroom. Julian's intel suggested the safe was behind the false wall in the shoe rack. I found the panel and pried it open. The keypad glowed blue in the darkness. I hesitated. Richard was a narcissist, but he was also predictable. I typed in the date of his first $1 million deal. The light turned red. I tried his birthday. Red again. Then, with a sinking feeling, I typed in Serafina's birthday. The light turned green. The door swung open. Inside lay a black ledger and a hard drive. I opened the book. It was not just accounting, it was a confession. Every bribe, every laundered dollar, every stolen design was recorded in Richard's meticulous handwriting. I shoved the evidence into my bag, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I had the smoking gun. Now, it was time to aim. The dinner party was a masquerade of the most grotesque kind. Richard had invited 30 of the city's most influential power players to our home, ostensibly for a casual gathering, but in reality, it was a coronation. I moved through the room in my simple beige dress, playing the role of the gracious, diminished wife, filling wine glasses and offering hors d'oeuvres while my husband prepared to twist the knife. Richard tapped his spoon against his champagne flute, silencing the room. "Attention, everyone." Richard beamed, wrapping an arm around Serafina's waist. "I have a special announcement. In light of her extraordinary contribution to the Phoenix Project, I am appointing Serafina as the new vice president of Vertex Holdings effective immediately." A hush fell over the room. Eyes darted toward me, expecting a breakdown. Instead, I stepped forward, picking up a glass of champagne. My hand did not shake. "To Serafina," I said, my voice clear and sweet, "the company is lucky to have someone with your unique set of talents." Richard looked at me, suspicion flickering in his eyes before being replaced by smug satisfaction. He believed he had finally broken me. Serafina preened, basking in the victory, her guard completely lowered. Later in the evening, I found Serafina holding court near the patio doors with Mrs. Halloway and Mrs. Sterling, two of the most gossipy wives of the city officials. I approached them with a meek smile. "You must be so happy," I said softly to Serafina. "A baby is such a blessing. I know Richard is thrilled to finally have an heir." Serafina, who had consumed one too many glasses of vintage wine, rolled her eyes and leaned in, keeping her voice low but audible enough for the women behind her. "Oh, please," Serafina scoffed. "Richard is obsessed with his legacy. This bump, it is just insurance. A golden handcuff. Once I have the ring and the stock options, he can change all the diapers he wants while I spend the trust fund. Mrs. Halloway gasped audibly. I saw the look of disgust pass between the two older women. The seed was planted. Just then, the doorbell rang. The butler opened it to reveal Julian. He stood in the doorway like a storm cloud, dressed in a tuxedo that cost more than Richard's car. Mr. Blackwood. Richard rushed forward, practically salivating. He did not know Julian was my ally. He only knew Julian was a billionaire looking for a place to park his money. I am honored you could make it. I hear you have a project looking for funding, Julian said, his voice smooth and dangerous. The Phoenix. It is a gold mine, Richard bragged, leading Julian toward the study. Projected returns of 300% within the first year. I followed them, hovering by the open door. I am interested, Julian said, swirling his whiskey. But Ironwood policy is strict. I need a full, independent audit of the project's financials before I sign a check for $50 million. Richard stiffened. I saw the panic flare in his eyes. He looked at Serafina, who had followed them in. We can provide the internal reports. Richard stammered. Independent. Julian insisted. Tomorrow morning. When Julian left, Richard and Serafina frantically locked themselves in the home office. I listened from the hallway. We cannot show him the real books, Richard hissed. He will see the money we moved to the Cayman Islands. Just fake them, Serafina snapped. Use the dummy logs we created for the tax inspectors. Swap the files in the audit packet. He will never know the difference. They spent 2 hours doctoring the files. When they finally went upstairs to bed, exhausted and arrogant, they left the sealed audit envelope on the desk, ready for the courier in the morning. I waited until the house was silent. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 3 times. I crept into the office, the moonlight casting long shadows across the floor. My hands moved with surgical precision. I took the envelope Richard had prepared and carefully steamed it open. I removed the fabricated reports. In their place, I slid in the stack of documents I had retrieved from his safe the real ledger, the money laundering trails, and the stolen blueprints proving I was the architect. I resealed the envelope. It was done. He was sending his own confession to the auditors. I walked up the stairs to the master bedroom one last time. Richard was asleep, snoring softly, oblivious to the fact that his life had just ended. I looked at him, searching for any trace of the man I had once loved, but I found only a stranger. I slid my diamond wedding ring off my finger. It felt heavy, burdened with 7 years of lies. I placed it on the nightstand next to his phone. Beside the ring, I propped up a stark white business card from the most ruthless divorce attorney in New York. Goodbye. Richard, I whispered into the darkness. I turned and walked out of the room, closing the door on my past forever. The morning sun brought no warmth to Richard. It only brought the process server. I was not there to see it, but through the listening device I had planted, I heard the satisfying sound of the envelope hitting his desk. He laughed. It was a dry, arrogant sound. He believed he had already won. He thought he had siphoned off enough millions to leave me destitute while he started over with his young mistress. He picked up the phone to call his lawyer, likely to gloat, but he never got the chance to dial. His secretary, the temporary one he had hired to replace the loyal staff I had poached, burst into the office. Her voice was shrill with panic. Mr. Vertex, we just received a cease and desist order from the United States Copyright Office. What are you talking about? Richard snapped. Throw it in the trash. We can't, sir, she stammered. It is a federal injunction. The Phoenix project has been flagged for intellectual property theft. The original designs were registered 3 years ago. By Elena Vertex. I sat in the safe house, sipping black coffee, watching the stock ticker on Julian's laptop. I had registered those blueprints the day I finished them, paying the fees with cash I had saved from the grocery budget. It was the only smart thing I had done in my marriage. The news hit the wire services within the hour, Vertex Holdings accused of fraud. Flagship project halted. On the screen. The graph line for Vertex stock plummeted like a stone dropped down a well. It fell 10% in 5 minutes, then 20. The phones in Richard's office began to ring in a cacophony of disaster. Investors were pulling out. The board of directors was calling for an emergency meeting. Through the bug, I heard the heavy oak door slam. "Serafina!" "Richard." "What is happening?" Serafina screamed. "My broker just called. He said the stock options you gave me are worthless. They are trading at junk status." "Calm down, Serafina." Richard tried to soothe her, but his voice was tight with fear. "It is just a glitch. Elena is bluffing. I will fix this. Fix it," Serafina shrieked. "You said she was stupid. You said she was a doormat. I need cash. Richard, I want to cash out now. I am not going down with this ship. I have a baby to think about. Shut up about the baby and let me think." Richard roared. He scrambled to his laptop. I could hear the frantic clicking of keys. He was trying to access the offshore accounts, the rainy day fund he had stolen from the company. "No, no, no, no," Richard muttered, the sound rising into a panic. "Access denied. That is impossible." Julian walked into the room where I was sitting, holding his phone. "The accounts in the Cayman Islands have been frozen. The International Banking Commission flagged them for suspicious activity regarding money laundering. He cannot touch a dime." Richard was trapped. He had no liquidity, no stock value, and his legal walls were closing in. His phone rang again. This time, it was his personal cell. I looked down at my own phone. I was calling him. I let it ring 5 times. I imagined him staring at the screen, his hands shaking, wondering if I was calling to beg or to bargain. I ended the call before he could pick up. My fingers flew across the screen as I typed a single message. "See you at the press conference launch of the Phoenix." I hit send. Back in his office. The silence was heavy. "She knows," Richard whispered. "She knows everything." "We have to cancel the launch," Serafina cried. "We have to run! We can't run!" Richard yelled. "My passport is in the safe at the bank, and the bank is closed if we cancel the launch. The stock hits 0 and we go to prison for fraud. We have to go through with it. We have to sell the lie one last time. If I can convince them the project is real. Maybe the price rallies enough for us to sell and get out." It was the desperation of a drowning man grabbing at a shark. He had no choice. He had to walk onto that stage and pretend everything was perfect. Julian placed a hand on my shoulder. His voice was calm, a stark contrast to the chaos we were listening to. "The stage is ready. Elena," he said, "my team has bypassed the firewall for the presentation system at the convention center. We control every screen, every speaker, and every light. The show is yours." I stood up and smoothed the lapel of my crimson suit. I was done hiding. "Let's go," I said. "I do not want to be late for my husband's funeral." The Grand Meridian Convention Center was a cavern of glass and steel, filled to the brim with the suffocating perfume of high society and the electric hum of anticipation. Every major news outlet in New York was present, their cameras trained on the stage like snipers waiting for a target. The launch of the Phoenix project was meant to be the coronation of Vertex Holdings, but the air felt heavy, charged with the static of an approaching storm. I watched from the shadows of the entrance hall as Richard and Serafina made their grand entrance. They were a study in desperate glamour. Richard wore a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, though I could see the tension in his jaw, the way a muscle twitched beneath his skin every time a camera flash went off. Beside him, Serafina was draped in a floor-length gown of pure white silk, tight enough to accentuate the curve of her pregnancy. She clung to his arm, playing the role of the persecuted saint, the fragile mother-to-be harassed by a vindictive ex-wife. They smiled and waved, but their eyes were darting around the room, terrified and hollow. "Ready?" Julian asked, offering me his arm. "I was born ready for this," I replied. The double doors swung open and we stepped into the light. I had burned the beige dress. Tonight, I wore a suit of crimson red, sharp and tailored, a color that screamed power and danger. My hair was loose, cascading over my shoulders, and my makeup was precise, highlighting eyes that no longer held any tears. A hush swept through the room like a cold wind. The chatter stopped. The clinking of glasses ceased. 500 heads turned in unison. The whispers began immediately, a rising tide of gossip. They had expected the broken, weeping woman Richard had described in the tabloids. Instead, they got a warrior queen flanked by the most dangerous corporate raider in the city. Richard saw us. His smile faltered, dropping like a stone. He excused himself from a group of Japanese investors and marched toward us, his face flushing with anger. He blocked our path to the VIP section, his chest heaving. "You have some nerve showing your face here," Richard hissed, his voice low so the reporters nearby would not hear. "Get out, Elena. Security will drag you out if I snap my fingers. And you, Blackwood, get away from my wife." Julian did not even blink. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a black titanium card. "I suggest you check your shareholder registry." "Richard," Julian said, his voice as smooth and cold as a glacier. "As of 9 o'clock this morning, Ironwood acquired 51% of the voting shares of Vertex Holdings. I am not a guest. I am your boss." Richard turned the color of ash. He stared at the card, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. Serafina, who had followed him, grabbed his arm, her fingernails digging into his sleeve. "Richard, do something," she whined, her voice trembling. I took a step closer to her. She flinched, stepping back. I looked her up and down, letting my gaze rest on her stomach. "You look lovely in white, Serafina," I said, my voice sweet and poisonous. "Tell me." "Is that baby your insurance? Or is it your death sentence?" Serafina paled, her hand flying to her throat as if she could not breathe. She knew exactly what I meant. She knew the DNA test results were already in my bag. Before Richard could respond, the lights in the auditorium dimmed. The heavy bass of the intro music began to thump, vibrating through the floorboards. The stage manager hissed from the side curtain, frantically waving for Richard. "Mr. Vertex, you are on in 30 seconds. Richard looked at me, then at Julian, terror flooding his eyes. He was trapped. He had to go up there and sell a lie to the world, knowing we held the truth in our hands. Sweat began to bead on his forehead, ruining his makeup. "Go on, darling," I whispered, leaning in close to his ear. "Do not keep your public waiting." He stumbled backward, turning toward the stage like a man walking to the gallows. The spotlight hit him, blinding and merciless, exposing every drop of sweat as he approached the microphone. Richard stood alone on the stage, a tiny figure against the backdrop of a massive LED screen that towered 40 feet high. He gripped the podium with both hands, his knuckles white, but his voice was steady, practiced, and dripping with false humility. "When I first conceived the idea for the Phoenix," Richard said, his voice echoing through the silent auditorium, "I knew it had to be more than just a building. It had to be a legacy. I spent 3 years toiling in solitude, sketching late into the night, driven by a vision of a sustainable future. It is my gift to this city, a testament to what one man's unyielding will can achieve." I stood in the wings, my arms crossed, watching him weave his web of lies. Beside me, Julian checked his watch and nodded to the technician at the control board. "Now," Julian commanded. Behind Richard, the beautiful, rotating 3D rendering of the eco-city suddenly froze. The screen went black for a heartbeat, causing a murmur of confusion to ripple through the audience. Then, it flared back to life, but the pristine architectural models were gone. In their place was gritty, high-definition footage from a security camera. It was the interior of Richard's private office. The date stamp in the corner read 2 weeks ago. On the screen, Richard was sitting on his desk, holding a glass of scotch, laughing. Serafina was on his lap, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. The audio, crisp and amplified by the stadium-quality speakers, blasted through the room, drowning out Richard's live microphone. "You worry too much, baby," the Richard on the screen said, his voice slurring slightly. "That stupid woman still thinks I love her. She is pathetic. I will just let her finish the final structural drawings for the project, and then I will kick her out. She is a workhorse, nothing more. Once the Phoenix is launched, we take the money and she takes the fall." The silence in the auditorium was shattered. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, followed by the immediate, frantic clicking of 1,000 camera shutters. Richard spun around, staring up at his own face on the giant screen. He turned back to the audience, his eyes wide with horror. He grabbed the microphone, screaming into it, "Cut the feed. There is a technical malfunction. Turn it off. Turn it off right now." But the microphone in his hand was dead. The audio from the screen continued, relentless and condemning. "But what if she finds out about the accounts?" Serafina's voice on the screen whined. "She won't," Richard's digital doppelganger sneered. "I forged her signature on everything. If the feds come, they go for her. I am clean." The image shifted again. This time, it was a slideshow of documents, moving fast enough to be seen but slow enough to be read. Bank transfer records showing $5 million moving from Vertex Holdings to a shell company in the Seychelles. Then, close-ups of contracts with my name signed at the bottom in a handwriting that was jagged and clearly traced. "This is slander," Richard yelled, his voice cracking as he waved his arms frantically at the projection booth. "I will sue everyone in this room. Stop this." The audience was no longer polite. People were standing up, shouting questions. The investors were on their phones, likely screaming at their brokers to sell. But the show was not over. The screen shifted one last time. It was a single document, stark and clinical. A paternity test report from the New York Genetics Lab. The header read, "Prenatal paternity test. Mother Serafina Vane. Alleged father Richard Vertex. Probability of paternity 0%. The crowd roared. Richard froze, his eyes glued to the screen. Then, a second line of text appeared below it, highlighted in red. Biological father Match Marcus Vane. The room exploded into chaos. The revelation that Serafina was carrying the child of her own father's criminal associate, the man Richard had been laundering money for, was the final grotesque twist that turned the tragedy into a farce. Serafina, who had been standing on the side of the stage, let out a piercing shriek that cut through the noise. "No, no. It is a lie. It is all fake," she screamed, grabbing her hair, her face contorted into a mask of pure terror. Richard turned slowly to look at her. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a look of total, shattering betrayal. He looked from the screen, where the proof of her infidelity glared down at him, to the woman he had destroyed his marriage for. "You," Richard stammered, his voice barely audible over the din of the crowd. "You told me it was mine. You told me. I was the only one." He took a step toward her, his hands shaking violently. The cameras were flashing blindingly now, capturing every second of his destruction. He was not just ruined financially, he was stripped naked before the world, a fool who had burned down his castle for a woman who was playing him the entire time. The empire of Vertex Holdings did not crumble slowly, it turned to dust in a matter of seconds. The auditorium had descended into a frenzy of noise and blinding lights, a chaotic sea of judgment that had turned against its masters. I walked up the steps to the stage, the click of my heels lost in the roar of the crowd. Richard stood frozen at the podium, his face pale and slick with sweat. He looked at me not as a wife, but as an executioner. I reached out and firmly pulled the microphone from his trembling hand. He did not resist. He was already a broken man. I turned to the sea of reporters and raised my chin, my voice booming through the speakers, cutting through the chaos like a knife. "My name is Elena," I announced, my tone calm but absolute. "I am the true author of The Phoenix, and I hereby declare that I am revoking all rights for Vertex Holdings to use this design effective immediately." The announcement was the final nail in the coffin. Richard's knees buckled. He collapsed to the floor right there on the stage, oblivious to the cameras broadcasting his humiliation to the world. He crawled toward me, grabbing the hem of my pants with desperate, clawing hands. "Elena, baby, please," he sobbed, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the sweat. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. Please forgive me. It was not me. It was her. She made me do it. She twisted my mind. Do not let them take me." I looked down at him, feeling nothing but a cold detachment. But before I could answer, a white blur launched itself across the stage. Serafina, enraged by his betrayal and the destruction of her own fantasy, threw herself at him. "You lying coward." She screamed, clawing at his face. "You promised me the world. And now you blame me. You are pathetic." They rolled on the floor of the stage, a tangle of tuxedo and white silk, screaming insults at each other while the world watched. It was grotesque. It was the end of dignity. The man who had mocked me for being useless was now fighting in the dirt, tearing at his mistress like a wild animal. Then the heavy doors at the back of the hall burst open. "Police, nobody move." A voice boomed. A dozen officers in tactical gear swarmed the aisles, led by a detective holding a warrant. Julian had timed this perfectly. They rushed the stage, pulling Serafina off Richard and hauling him to his feet. "Richard Vertex!" the detective shouted over the noise. "You are under arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering." The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the room for me. The flashbulbs went wild. The same crowd that had laughed at me just a week ago, the people who had called me a trophy wife, now stared at me in silence. I saw fear in their eyes. I saw respect. They realized that the woman in the red suit was not a victim. I was the storm that had just leveled the building. Richard looked back at me as the officers dragged him away. His eyes were wide, pleading, searching for the woman who used to fix all his mistakes. But that woman was gone. I did not feel the hate I expected to feel. I only felt a profound, heavy pity for a man who had everything and threw it away for a mirage. The reporters surged forward, shouting my name, thrusting microphones in my face. "Elena, is it true you own the company now? Elena, did you plan this?" I felt a heavy, warm coat settle over my shoulders. Julian stepped in front of me, his broad back creating a wall between me and the hungry mob. "That is enough," Julian commanded, his voice dark and final. "She is done talking." He guided me toward the wings, his hand firm on my back, shielding me from the madness we had unleashed. The ballroom was clearing out, leaving behind the debris of a shattered empire. The police had dragged Richard out through the side exit, but the heavy silence he left behind was filled instantly by Julian's voice. He stood on the raised platform of the lobby, commanding the attention of the remaining board members and the shell-shocked press. As the majority shareholder, Julian announced, his voice echoing off the marble walls, "I am dissolving the current board of directors immediately. Vertex Holdings will be absorbed into the Ironwood conglomerate, and effective tomorrow morning, the new CEO who will oversee the restructuring is the only person in this building with any integrity. Elena Vertex." A ripple of shock went through the crowd, but nobody dared to object. I stood in the center of the room, feeling the weight of their gazes. These were the same people who had snubbed me at the buffet table an hour ago. The same women who had whispered behind their fans about my cheap shoes were now looking at the floor, terrified to meet my eyes. They parted for me like the Red Sea, offering mumbled apologies that I did not bother to acknowledge. I walked through the crowd toward the edge of the stage. Serafina was still there. She had not been arrested, but she looked as though she had been destroyed. She was sitting on the floor, her white dress ruined, mascara streaming down her face in black rivers. She looked up at me, her lip trembling, realizing that the man she had schemed to steal was now a felon, and the child she carried the leverage she had banked on was publicly revealed as a fraud. I stopped in front of her. I did not offer a hand to help her up. Elena. She whimpered, her voice cracking. I didn't know about the money laundering. I swear, I have nothing. I looked down at her, seeing not a rival, but a fool. You wanted my life. Serafina, I asked, my voice low and calm. You worked so hard to take my place. Well, congratulations. You have it. She blinked, confused. You can keep him. I continued, gesturing toward the door where the police had exited. He is all yours, and since you are his partner in everything, I am sure the lawyers will be looking to you to help settle his debts. I believe he owes the creditors about $50 million. Good luck with that. Serafina gasped, burying her face in her hands as the reality of her ruin crashed down on her. I turned my back on her. The sound of her sobbing faded as I walked away. My heels clicked against the polished marble floor, a rhythmic, powerful sound that signaled my departure. With every step, I felt a layer of my old self falling away, the insecurity, the fear, the desperate need for validation. I left it all there on the floor with Serafina. Julian was waiting for me at the main entrance. The heavy glass doors were held open by his security team. He did not look at me with the predatory gaze of a business shark, nor the pity of a savior. He looked at me with the steady, grounded look of an equal. He opened the door to the limousine himself. It is done, Julian said softly. No, I replied, sliding into the leather seat. It has just begun. He got in beside me, and the car pulled away from the curb, gliding smoothly into the traffic of the city. I looked out the window. The skyline of New York, which had once felt like a cage of cold lights and judgment, now looked different. The skyscrapers were not oppressive giants. They were challenges waiting to be conquered. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool air. I waited for the sadness to hit me. I waited for the grief of a 7-year marriage ending in flames. But it did not come. Instead, I felt a vast, terrifying, exhilarating freedom. As the car merged onto the highway, leaving the wreckage of Vertex Holdings in the rearview mirror, I saw my reflection in the glass. The woman staring back at me was not the broken wife who had hidden in the shadows. She was the architect of her own fate. For the first time in 7 years, I smiled. It was not a polite smile for a camera, or a nervous smile for a husband. It was a real smile. I had burned his empire to the ground, and from the ashes, I had risen. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on Elena's revenge. If you enjoyed this journey, please make sure to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more listeners.